Hi, and welcome to this edition of the Small Talks Big Conversations program. My name is Moussa Mchangama. I am your host today. I'm the co-founder of Sustainability Advisory in Futurum, based here in Copenhagen. With me today is a person I've been looking so much forward to talking to. We will be dissecting and discussing the topic of socio-environmental injustice in the fashion industry in particular, and why businesses, organizations, the industry at whole needs to move the notion of justice to the center of their new operations. With me today from New York is Céline Semaan. Welcome, Céline.
Thank you for having me, Moussa.
And thank you so much for joining me. You are a designer, an advocate, you're the founder of the Slow Factory Foundation, working tirelessly to promote new notions of sustainability and of justice in this industry. If we are to start out with the basics, I think there is such a big focus on sustainability, maybe on the material level, on the product level, on the environmental level. At the other hand, 2020 also gave us a renewed focus on social issues. What is this notion of socio-environmental injustice if we are to define the topic of this conversation a bit more to start out?
Definitely. I just want to say that socio-environmental justice is not merely a concept. What the world needs the global north to understand is that it is a reality in the lives of millions of people. Socio-environmental exploitation is real, and it is on the industry's back, basically. It is how the industry, the fashion industry, has been designed to thrive. What the global north is hearing and defining as a concept and bringing this conversation to the forefront is actually the cries of people and the planet and people advocating for the planet, pleading for justice, mercy, and a sense of empathy. So it's not merely just a concept that we are exploring here, it is a reality.
And I think, first of all, that is a very wise answer. I think to so many people, it is deeply uncomfortable to sort of examine current systems, especially current systems that are profiting very few people in general. But this uncomfortability is something that we really need to sit with and examine, especially in the fashion industry, if we're looking at a system that is built on sort of imperialist and colonialist practices. So how do we examine ourselves? How do we ask the questions and get other people to do the same?
Musa, when I first read your question, I was wondering who is uncomfortable. If you are standing on my foot, for example, who is uncomfortable? If I tell you, get off my foot, should I also have to care that it might make you uncomfortable or awkward? All of these emotions are culturally white feelings, basically the feelings of awkwardness, the feelings of expecting politeness out of someone who is suffering, and sometimes at your own hand. So when we're talking about uncomfortable feelings or it's uncomfortable to examine our current system, I would love to understand for who is it uncomfortable to examine. It is necessary. It is necessary for us to explore this without this discomfort because this discomfort is privilege. There are so many teachings, honestly, I cannot even summarize them in this talk, but that if justice is making you feel uncomfortable, then you are in a form in a way wrapped up in a certain comfort and ignorance in a way that takes away from your ability to address this. For instance, this feeling of being uncomfortable, it's not justified. We cannot just walk on eggshells around this feeling of feeling uncomfortable when the entire world is being oppressed at this time, especially the world that the fashion industry is benefiting from. There is, a hierarchy of values. Let's say for this sweater that I'm wearing, all the way as close as it gets to the earth. So from the cotton up, from the harvest up to this T-shirt, there is value that is being completely decentralized or centralized. There's a central value on marketing and on shareholders and on the people who are benefiting from the sale of this item. But as you know, as we go down and further down, all the way to the soil, there is less and less value that we are attributing to the farmers, to the land, to the seeds, and to the way that we are harvesting this t-shirt, this sweater.
And how do we, because I think not just the notion of value needs to not just sort of increase and change also away from economic value only to different kinds of value also in terms of people, for example, having value. But I would like to dive a little bit deeper into what you're talking about with being uncomfortable and who is uncomfortable, because I think one of the sort of things maybe we can see as this industry is that there are so many companies who are making billions in profit that where the sort of the magnitude of the people involved in the business operations, not in the actual production of the garment, but in the business operations, are very far removed from the oppressive reality you're talking about here. So if we are to sort of examine not just who is uncomfortable, but also the value of getting people to understand why they should examine their uncomfortability, we could maybe say, and how we get them to do so. What is that? Because I fear that what we're talking about here can be sort of used just as a new way of making a different kind of profit for the same people.
Mm-hmm. So I feel like you have many questions in once and in one.
I probably do.
It's a bit hard for me to focus, but let's just go back to the feeling of uncomfortableness. There's a word for that. It's white fragility. And what that means is that your feelings, the feelings of feeling uncomfortable, override the feelings of justice or the demands for justice or the feelings of anyone else, even multiplied by millions. So that is also the way that this system is being designed to prioritize and to value a group of people over another.
And I mean, that is basically the system that the fashion industry is built upon. Exploitative practices, sort of making a lot of profit on this value decreasing down through the value chain. You've said previously that the system is broken, that it's exploitative, and that it lacks resiliency. You've also said, I remember reading, that this industry lacks heart. Could you elaborate a little bit on that and sort of go into how we can envision something different? Because I think that is also what is at the core of the call for justice, is imagining a different world.
You know, what we do oftentimes is to address the elephant in the room. Addressing the elephant in the room has never been an easy task. In the beginning of my career, when I started tracing supply chain in the fashion industry and simply mapping them and overlaying the supply chain that we have today with how colonial routes have existed in the 1400s and in the 1500s, even just mapping these two maps over top of each other was exposing the broken system. You know, when you say, I've previously said the system is broken, I didn't say the system is broken. I demonstrated that the system was broken by simply mapping supply chains and overlaying them over routes that already existed, that were routes built from colonialism. And I said, you know, colonialism is not a thing of the past. It's an economic reality. It is the way that the economy works, profit works. You know, if we take, for example, the way that we are understanding value, and I don't mean to call you out, but I'm just going to take this conference, for example. You know, you all have raised money for this non-for-profit, you've paid for the studio, you've paid for the technician, you've paid for the coffee, you've paid for everyone around that is going to be broadcasting this. And probably the studio is white owned, who knows? And I'm making an assumption here, but I'm the one giving you the content, the wisdom, the information, and I'm asked to find the solutions. And without me, we wouldn't be talking, you know, you would be talking to yourself basically. So this is how the system is built. This is what equity is. I'm not the one being paid. And therefore, there's a hierarchy of values that have been placed above me. And that's how the system is designed for inequity. Where is the equity and priority of resources and justice in receiving the funds to support who is providing the most value? In the case of a t-shirt, of a sweater, of a pair of jeans, how are we designing the value system? It is based on exploitation, like this is not something I'm saying, and the system is broken, and I'm not the first one to say this. It is the reality in which you either wish to be aware of or not. And in this case, ignorance is as violent as the system itself. It feels complicated, right? But let me talk about a small example that you'll be able to relate to. A good system that is good for the people and good for the earth, is designed in a way where resources, values, and actions are aligned and transpire in everything.
And first of all, if I, because I would like to dive into that a little bit in a second, but I want to say I'm glad that you called this out in terms of this talk in particular as well. First of all, I think that is important, and I think the practice of calling things out when there is not just a need to, but also it having a massive importance in creating change is at the very core of sort of different new approaches in this industry, because there hasn't been a tradition for that, at least not in the context of sort of big business in the global north, ever listening to other voices, ever listening to other realities, ever placing value on new perspectives and new insights. So I am curious in that the platform that you have built, the work you're doing with Slow Factory Foundation, this sort of envisioning of different futures or new futures, of a future that is nurturing, that is sort of rekindling relationships. How has that, how do you see that evolvement? Because that is also, I think, a result not just of your hard work, but of you being very, very sort of good at figuring out how to approach this in a way that translates to people. So could you elaborate a little bit on that? Because I think that is important.
Your questions are so like la 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 la. I don't know what to answer to, because it's like 10 questions in one. But like, to answer to what we do at Slow Factory is that for instance, it's a very ancient teaching. It's not something new. We are not exploring anything groundbreaking. We are working with people that are in frontline communities, marginalized folks. As you said in the beginning, the fashion industry in the global north has done an incredible job at ignoring these voices, at pretending they don't exist, at silencing them. It's rooted and grounded in colonialism. There is a word for it. It's called cultural erasure, oppression of these voices, and the silencing of these voices and pretending they don't exist or that nothing was there is how colonialism was able to succeed and to expand across all nations in the global south, and therefore creating a way that all people in the global south are completely dependent of the generosity or the economic injustice of the global north. And therefore, at Slow Factory, what we do is exposing these things. When we say exposing, it's merely, and again, I don't want to be confused with activists and activism, because as we are exposing these things, we are creating maps that are allowing brands to analyze the risk analysis, because all of these things that we are exposing are a risk to the brand, not a risk for being called out, but a risk to running out of resources at the end of the day. This is the language they understand. A risk of running out of either human resources or natural resources. And therefore, when we are able to expose these things in a system that is breaking, at least, not completely broken, but it is breaking. It is, and again, 2020 has accelerated some of that fragility of the system itself. Um, when we are exposing these issues, it is not for us to halt or to stop progress. In fact, it is a call for progress. It is a call for innovation and creativity, because as we are looking at it today, collectively, our humanity can no longer survive under this kind of linear colonial system that exists, and we have to begin redesigning our systems in a regenerative manner. And that is what Slow Factory does, hand in hand with brands that have had the courage to look outside of their comfort zone, look outside of whatever was their business as usual, and start innovating from the ground up. And that touches on material innovation, that touches on equity centered design, in the way that we are designing equity from the ground up, in the way that workers are treated across the supply chain equally, fairly, in the same values that the global north is so proud to explain. Like the global north is very proud to say that they are benefiting from a democracy, benefiting from equality, but it goes on just within their, the limits of their countries. When they are operating abroad, they aren't applying these values anymore. And so that is what we are looking at.
And so one of the things I'm sort of hearing is that your work also removes the arguments of business as usual.
Yes,
Could that be said?
definitely. So let me rephrase a little bit this question. Let's go back to the metaphor of you, and I'm very sorry, Musa, but you will be used as an example. But when I say you, the fashion industry, you can understand the metaphor. You are standing on my foot. Your question is, what can I do to remain on your foot, but I'm going to slightly shift my weight so that it would seem like I am not standing on your foot? That is the question of business as usual. How can I go on business as usual and just add people and planet onto my equation? Okay, this is where optics versus impact become unproductive. It becomes in the realm of the sustainability politics, essentially, of let me look good, but not really do good. Let's imagine what success would be like if it included people and planet in an authentic, decentralized way. And again, white supremacy has a hard time imagining what a world would be like without profit and value defined by who is standing on the most feet.
And so could you dive into that a little bit more? Because I think what we are looking at is a very different understanding than, at least in the global north, that we are used to, of who has value, who has the right to express themselves, and to get access to be at the forefront. It is not something that, at least in Copenhagen, where I'm sitting right now, as a black man, there is a very big awareness of yet. It's something that is being pushed now. 2020 has propelled that. So how do we elaborate? Sorry, not how do. Could you elaborate a little bit on that, of saying, what does that future actually look like for everyone, not just for the few that are standing on the foot of the other?
Everything is going to look entirely different, and if this system has centered justified injustices, again, to be honest, how can we, as the global south, for instance, and that's the position I'm taking because that's where I come from, um, how are we going to be coming up with the solution that will benefit all of us but of course the global north, all the while being oppressed and fighting for the bare minimum. I can see that oftentimes the global north comes to us and say, well, what do you want? How, okay, imagine a better world. But how can we imagine a better world when we are, fighting for the necessities, the bare necessities, clean water, clean air. Um, However, that's why I started Slow Factory. That's what we do at Slow Factory. Again, I said earlier, we design regenerative systems, but we also work in imagining a new future, a future where justice, equity are part of the culture, because they really need to be a part of the culture, the company culture, the government, people's culture. Sustainability is a culture. It's not just, a strategy that you may apply or a department that's going to take care of it. It is very much a culture that all employees must believe in, must really see value in it. Otherwise, it's a mere strategy and it can be debated. Can you debate human rights? Can you debate environmental justice? I don't think it's debatable anymore. And I don't think we're in that position. So once it becomes part of the culture, then it is easier for us to decide, okay, if we all believe in this, how do we bridge the gap between our values and our actions? Because right now, we're all believing that human life and the environmental rights of our planet are important, even perhaps more important, than the profit itself. Because we can't eat money at the end of the day, and that's a Native American saying. Um,
I'd like to explore where you ended just now, and something you said early on, sort of it's not new knowledge. The importance of actually using or going back to the old truths and old ways of being invested in and with nature, for example, your surroundings. A lot of the ideas of living that has been prevalent throughout the global south and that has been stripped from many cultures through colonialism. A lot of the knowledge of how we could actually live in this world is already there. It's just not knowledge sort of operated by people who we give value. How do you go back to sort of to older, or not older, but sort of different ways of looking at giving value to that knowledge?
yes, definitely. So by decentralizing, whiteness, it doesn't become just the norm anymore. Nor is it the goal. Nor is it the smartest, most innovative, fair way of existing. As you said, there are various other perspectives that have been marginalized or erased most of the time, especially under colonialism. And this is not something that is um, an old thing, all the way until the 1990s. Was it forbidden for Native American folks and indigenous folks in the Americas to practice their own religion and to practice their own practices to the land? It was forbidden by the state, by the government. And that's in Canada, in the United States, and Australia, in Brazil. So it's not ancient knowledge, although we do call it this way because it's so ancient that it has been serving civilizations for millennia, thousands of years. And when we say going back, it's also very problematic because it sounds like, taking a time machine and going back, which unfortunately we cannot do. But what the call to action is in this case is to centralizing indigenous voices, centralizing Black, brown, minority ethnic voices, scholars, thinkers, thought leaders, scientists, so that they can share their knowledge. And that is going to benefit the global north first, because it's too late in addressing climate change. Now, what we can do, we cannot revert to what the results of climate change are going to create. Frontline communities in the global south, the Middle East is going to be hit first by this climate emergency. But by centering these voices, we are able to at least address the catastrophes that are about to happen. you know Oops, I'm so sorry. I should have put this on do not disturb. But to go back to how do we do that, there are various ways. I would really encourage your audience to attend, or we rewatch the study halls that we created. There are 6-hour long free conferences online that are effectively centering the voices of Black, Brown, Indigenous, minority ethnic people from around the world, scientists, designers, thought leaders, educators. And I would also invite your audience to attend and to fund open education that is launching actually today for the second semester. We have about 6,500 students that most of them identify as Black, Brown, Indigenous, minority ethnic. And the classes are taught and led by Black, Brown, Indigenous, and minority ethnic scholars. So sorry about that. And so I would encourage everyone to attend these classes and to see how we are able to create regenerative economies rooted in equity and justice. These classes are available online for everyone. They are free. The study hall are free lecture series. And I would encourage people that find these interesting to fund them, to support these types of infrastructures, these types of frameworks that are built on open education, open knowledge, open learning, and peer-to-peer education.
And we have to round off now, Céline, because our time is almost up. I just want to address the audience very directly here in saying that what is mentioned here as possibilities is such a big part of the difference between sort of stating to work with inclusion and diversity, for example, by doing it on the surface, and then actually supporting a new sort of foundation being built where people who have always been on the outside is being centralized for the first time. I would encourage you to follow Céline's examples. Please do. Céline, before sort of finishing, if you are to look a little bit ahead towards not just this year we just entered, but the next couple of years, very shortly, what's your sort of next big focus, or how do you continue this work?
Definitely. And thank you for having me. And I know this is not an easy conversation, so I applaud you, Moussa, for handling this conversation so gracefully. The future for Slow Factory is definitely in expanding the institution that we have built for the past 10 years on the notions and principles of peer-to-peer learning and open education, and also labs that are accessible for all. What we are launching coming soon at Slow Factory is an expansion of the first science incubator in fashion that we launched last year, where we paired designers and scientists together and funded them to accelerate the innovation that basically taking outside of the lab what is built in the lab and taking outside of fashion what is usually within the fashion industry. So really creating a way for the two industries to collaborate hand in hand. And so we are expanding this program for next year. It's the first science incubator in fashion, and we need more of that. We need everyone's support on that, because when we are talking about innovation and we're talking about creativity and the fashion industry being so creative, it really is coming to life with this incubator. It's really amazing to see influential designers working with groundbreaking new materials and new frameworks as well, frameworks that are centering Black and Brown women at the heart of their processes, and not for the optics and not for marketing, but really for the benefit of us all. So I really want everyone to look out for the next iteration of the first science incubator in fashion, one by one, and the new materials that are coming out of this incubator.
I know that I'm definitely looking forward to following that. And Céline, we have to stop now. I just want to thank you so much for participating. Thank you for calling out. Thank you for the work you are doing. It is so important, and I hope the audience out there takes note of its importance, because this, here in Copenhagen at least, is a first step into really pushing for the change that we so desperately need. So thank you so much for participating.
Thank you so much, Moussa. I appreciate it. Thank you all for listening.